NTAC was founded back in the mid 1990s, and that was with a report for protective intelligence and threat assessment for law enforcement. And it was based on assassinations of public figures and attempted assassinations of Secret Service protectees. And what that research had found, it was not a threat-based motivation for such actors, but it was more of a behavioral-based. And NTAC is taking that and extrapolated that along with school violence, workplace violence, mass attacks in public space, and acts of domestic terrorism. During my 26 years as a officer with the Secret Service Uniform Division and then a special agent, I have a great deal of experience in interviewing protective intelligence cases and completing threat assessment cases throughout my career. The Secret Service and NTAC especially uses in the prevention of targeted violence, uses the Secret Service threat assessment model, where it identifies persons of concern by gathering information from various systems on key investigative themes and assessing those concerns. Then the researchers and the agents take that information and develop an effective plan for case management. And that really comes down to education and training in the workplace and in schools and within government agencies and other entities. All the stakeholders in the community, such as law enforcement, judicial, social workers, and mental health experts, all have a role to play in preventing or identifying acts of subjects in the process of committing an act of targeted violence. For example, when my time as a case agent with the Secret Service, if we had a subject that had made a threat online, I would get that case if it was local. I would then check to see if that subject was of record with the Secret Service and what possible the investigation was with the last time. Was that subject arrested, or was that subject maybe referred to mental health? After completing that, I would go and do other database and criminal checks to see what their criminal history was. And then I would contact local law enforcement. Has local law enforcement had conducted any stops or have any contact with this individual? Was that individual for possible DUI or a stalking or an arrest for assault? We're going to look at all of those arrests and try and start putting the pieces of that puzzle together of what that subject is going on in their life. And that's where the locals have a great deal of local knowledge, is to say, and that they can provide to us and assist us. Then we would go and interview that subject and see what's going on. Perhaps they have some type of stressor in their life. Possibly have they lost a job, or is it a domestic breakup? Or maybe they have some grievance, not necessarily with the president, but maybe a grievance with another government agency. After interviewing that subject, and then we would follow up with corroborative interviews with neighbors, family, coworkers, and again, trying to get that big picture of what's going on in that subject's life. If that subject has had mental health treatment, and then we would go and speak with the doctors and review their records. Perhaps the subject was just off their meds for the day. And a lot of times in my experience, subjects that have suffering from mental illness will tell you yes or no, whether they follow up with their medications or not. And again, looking at the local law enforcement, they're the ones that have contact with these subjects, maybe on a daily or a weekly basis. So they are a great resource that we go to and look for gathering that information in conducting and completing our investigation. The researchers at NTAC, great analytical skills, and in fact, really great researchers. And what I mean by that is having the ability to use all resources, whether it be open source or even corroborative interviews. They need to be able to pick up the phone and sometimes cold call a detective or a witness to someone that they are researching with the act of targeted violence. You want to have that your aperture very wide in seeing what are these events that have led someone to either planning or had carried out a act of targeted violence. So once the NTAC goes and decides which event targeted violence that they'll are going to go ahead and research on and present their findings, they will start again with open source research, doing those corroborative interviews. Once they gather all that information, and then the researchers and analysts will go over, they'll bring it to a group of researchers who will then go ahead and discuss their findings and how best to prepare that research and what would be the best way to present on their findings that they had on that subject. Part of their research would be what has led to that subject that committed that act, whether that be, again, past stressors for divorce, financial difficulties. Maybe they just have a grievance with a maybe not a certain political figure or a protectee, but maybe someone, just a general politician. They will look at those sources, and then they will also go to whether that subject has suffered any type of drug or alcohol abuse or suffered some other traumatic event in their life. The Secret Service history with Protective Intelligence Division, we have used that with all of our Secret Service protectees. And in doing a threat assessment, you're doing a deep dive, especially for those that have over time, whether they've made it a direct or implied threat, or an example, just someone showing up to the White House claiming to live there. Even though that's not a direct or a veiled threat, what's the behavior for that person to come to the White House to say why they think that they live there or they may be the president? The Secret Service and the Protective Intelligence treats all of that the same, whether it's a veiled threat, direct threat, or even an instance where someone shows up. And again, we're the Protective Intelligence in that research is what's making that person, what's brought them to the attention of the Secret Service. The other part of the research, for example, the school shootings research, the Secret Service has had protectees with, when I was on the detail with President Obama's daughters, we take them to school every day. Again, on being an agent on the detail, protective agent, we're very aware of what that research was, and if there would be a subject brought to our attention that was maybe planning an act of targeted violence at a school. An act of targeted violence may not have been against the daughters. However, because they're at that school, that still is something would be of concern to us and how we could best assist the school. Although there's probably not one in particular I could think of, but I think anytime that NTAC is out educating and bringing more knowledge to the schools or local authorities or private businesses, having this education and sort of carrying on DHS's say something, see something, say something. Again, bringing that knowledge to people, not to be afraid and not worried about being involved. Maybe it prevents some act of targeted violence. I think that's sort of the big thing to get across. Even in our Secret Service protective mission, whether the president goes to give a speech at a college. Um, sometimes we'll never know if someone was planning an attack, whether a terrorist attack or an act of violence. It may be just that presence of the uniformed officers or all the agents that are there providing protection, maybe has just dissuaded that subject not to commit that act of violence. I know very many school districts are being involved in businesses with consultations. And I think that's the big win, where we're getting out. Maybe just that person, that coworker says, a subject seems that his mood has suddenly changed and maybe withdrawn. Just by them contacting and getting some type of intervention, again, I think is the big win. Is we don't always know, especially in this time with COVID, people working from home and getting out, a lot of stressors. And we just don't know what people are facing on a day-to-day business, their day-to-day life. To develop the students' strong analytical skills, to make them have strong verbal and written communications, and not to be afraid just to talk to people. When you're conducting these interviews or this research, it's not a criminal investigation. It's almost just a discussion like we're having. To have those, to be able to ask questions and to have follow-up questions, just to develop those skills, which over time takes a great deal of practice, I think is very important to be an effective researcher or analyst. I think to be open-minded and strike up friendships and find someone that would be there to mentor. There's a lot of great experienced people right now and are more than willing to help. And I think to really befriend those people and just sort of listen and get as much advice as you can from them, and learning, especially some of the nuances of being a researcher or an analyst. As we all know, there's tons of information flowing daily, and it's just to be able to know how to sort of what's important and maybe what's not important as events unfold.